so I'll pass them out if you can pass them back, and try to share as best as possible. Hi everyone, my name is Garret Merriam, and I'm here to, like all of us, try to sort of shed some hopefully rational perspectives on a very, very controversial and divisive issue. Abortion is one of those just perennial things. It seems like it's never going to go away. It's, people always seem to debate it, and it frequently seems like no progress can be made on it. It's frustrating, it's aggravating, it can break up families even when people can't see eye to eye on this issue. And when a problem is that resilient, it's hard to know even how to begin addressing it, how to speak to it in any sense at all. There's lots of different perspectives, of course. There's sociological perspectives, there's religious perspectives, there's psychological perspectives, there's feminist perspectives, there's medical perspectives, there's economic perspectives. But whatever approach it is that we're choosing to take, I hope we can all agree on at least one thing, that we should try to address the issue rationally. We shouldn't be giving in to prejudices, to biases, to knee-jerk reactions. We should be trying to think the issue through calmly and rationally, no matter where we begin and no matter where we end up. So this is going to mean, among other things, that we want to make sure we try to take a dispassionate look at the facts. At the medical facts, at the social facts, as many facts as we can get our hands on to chew on. And it's also going to mean that we have to try to honestly consider both sides. It can be very easy to just sort of pick your side and just dig in your heels and not think about the other side of the issue. And I want to encourage you all as much as possible to resist that temptation, to do your best to consider the issue from the other side as well as yours. To keep an open mind, and also to not demonize people who don't see eye to eye with you. That's something else that can really inhibit communication and progress when it comes to issues like this. So recognize that there are people of goodwill at all sides of this debate, and that doesn't mean that they're bad people. It doesn't mean that they're evil. It doesn't mean, like some of the really awful negative terms. Like, for example, people who are, what we might traditionally call pro-choice, calling them anti-life, or what we might traditionally call someone pro-life, calling them anti-woman. These terms don't help. All they serve to do is to insult people. They don't build bridges. They don't help people communicate. They don't help people see the other side of the issue. So, with that in mind, I do want to restate both what Crystal and Dr. Hawkins said, that it's probably actually not fair to be speaking of this as if it were a binary issue. To divide people into these two categories, pro-life and pro-choice, it really does sort of perpetuate and foster not only a myth about the sort of realities behind people's opinions about abortion, but also to sort of create a galvanization where everyone is divided into one of these two categories and never the twain shall meet. And that's really just not how it works. Most people will fall into one of two positions, or will fall into positions that are somewhere between the two absolute poles. So these are figures I nabbed from a New York Times poll from a couple of years back. They've divided into three separate positions, not counting the don't know, no answer. And you can see there's a fairly even spread between people who sort of on the sort of the extremes, and then the largest chunk, of course, is somewhere there in the middle. Now, my concern principally is not going to be the legal question of whether or not abortion should be legal or illegal. It's going to be the moral question, whether or not it's morally acceptable, morally permissible, or morally impermissible, or somewhere in between on such a spectrum. So I want to start off by saying I think there's very good reason why people fall in between those two extremes, because both extreme views have incredible philosophical difficulties that are hard to reconcile with a lot of our other moral intuitions. So For starters, let's take what we might call the extreme pro-choice position. That's going to be the position that says there's never a moral problem with abortion at all, under any circumstances. A woman can have an abortion at any time, for any reason, and it's the moral equivalent of getting a haircut, or the moral equivalent of having your appendix out. You know, some people do take this position, and it's not an unheard of position. But I find it a difficult position to reconcile with some of our other intuitions. So think, for example, about the kind of emotional reactions when women have a miscarriage. That is, a woman who had a wanted pregnancy, who wanted to bring a baby into this world, and she has a miscarriage. Would you really say to such a woman, "Oh, don't sweat it. You know, it's no different than getting a haircut, no different than having your appendix out"? If you did, I think you would be a very callous person. When someone suffers a loss like that, that's something that we should recognize as being a morally significant loss. And so this is, you know, this is an example that comes from the philosopher Rosalind Hursthouse. This is an example that she gives to show that, you know, it seems that we have to recognize there are moral problems surrounding the issue of abortion. The extreme pro-life position at also has difficulties. So, you know, this would be the idea that, you know, the fetus is the moral equivalent of a grown human being from the moment of conception. That's a phrase I'm going to return to momentarily. Now, the difficulty with that position comes in the form of a thought experiment. You'll see I'm going to be engaging in several thought experiments tonight. Some of these philosophers like to do. It's a thought experiment called the Burning Fertilization Clinic thought experiment. This comes from the political thinker Jane Hampshire. So I want you guys to think this through. Seriously imagine, put yourself in the following scenario. You're in a fertilization clinic, and it's on fire. The building is burning down very fast. You have to get out of there. You do not have much time. And you have enough time to grab one armful of stuff with you before you get out the door. And after you get out the door, it's locked down. You can't go back in. And so here is a choice. You have to choose between taking one of two things. The first is a pallet of 5 million frozen fertilized eggs. And let's say there's a refrigeration unit hooked up to it so they're not going to defrost or thaw. You know, so like that, there's 3 of them, but instead of 3, 5 million. And if you want to take it to even further, you can say that all 5 million have, you know, surrogate wombs waiting for them, and they will be implanted, and they will grow up to be full-fledged human beings if they survive. So you can take the pallet of 5 million fertilized eggs, or you can save a single unconscious 5-year-old child. But you can only take one or the other. Now, if the extreme pro-life position is correct, we should take the eggs, because that's 5 million lives we're saving as opposed to 1. You know, okay. If you want to mix it up a little bit just to see that, just imagine you have 2 choices. 1 unconscious 5-year-old or 5 unconscious 5-year-olds. Which of those 2 do you take? Obviously, you take the 5, because it's just the general idea that you should save as many lives as possible. And so if fertilized eggs were the moral equivalent of grown human beings from the moment of conception, this would be the sensible thing to go for and let the 1 child burn and die. Now, I've presented this thought experiment to hundreds and hundreds of people, students and otherwise, over the years. I've met maybe 2 or 3 people who are honestly willing to bite the bullet and say, yes, I would save the 5 million eggs. It seems as though almost everyone else recognizes that the right thing to do is to save the unconscious 5-year-old. So if that's the case, then this seems to shoot the idea that these are the moral equivalent of that right in the foot. If they were, you wouldn't be coming to that conclusion. So, with that in mind, with the idea that the extreme positions on both ends are untenable, we have to try to find an informed position somewhere in the middle. And the way to do that is by taking a look at the facts. And so I want to paint really here quickly a brief statistical portion of abortion in the United States. Several of the statistics I'm about to cite, Dr. Hawkins cited, they agree for the most part with one exception, which I'll get to when I get to it. Not every single one of these pieces of information will necessarily be relevant to the abortion debate writ large, but many of them will. And it's never really easy to say which ones are in advance, so that's why I'm going to throw it as much as possible and let you guys make up your own mind how much of this information is relevant and how much of it is not. So for starters, about 25% of all American pregnancies end in abortion. And when you switch over to unintended pregnancies, that figure jumps to almost half, almost 59. Every year, about 20 out of every 1,000 women between the ages of 15 and 44 have an abortion, and nearly half of those who have one have had an abortion before. In 2002, there were about 1.2 million abortions performed in the United States. This is down from a high of 1.36 million in 1996. You can sort of see the overall trend here from 74 when Roe v. Wade was decided and we got sort of official hard statistics. It went up for a while at first, it peaked, and then it dropped substantially in the 90s. And it seems to have plateaued since then, more or less. Now, precisely how many abortions there were before Roe v. Wade is very hard to estimate, of course, because there was illegal in large parts of the United States. So the estimates have a wide range, anywhere from 200,000 to 1.2 million. So it's hard to say exactly what effect Roe v. Wade had on the overall number of abortions in the United States. It might have not had a substantial effect, or it might have increased it. There's really no way to have any sort of statistical certainty one way or the other. Age and race. About 52% of women who have abortions in the United States are under the age of 25. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, these figures are largely coming from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. That's my source for these numbers. If anyone is interested in more specifics about that, please feel free to ask me afterwards. I'll point you to the references. Women aged 20 to 24 account for 33% of all abortions, and teenagers account for about 19%. White women have only 14% of abortions. This is compared to about 21% for Hispanics and 38% for African Americans. So, like Dr. Hawkins said, her figure was twice as likely. I have 1.5 times as likely. A Hispanic woman is 1.5 times as likely as a white woman to have an abortion. And black women are 3 times as likely to have an abortion as a white woman. So, when you consider the fact that, that African Americans make up about 12% of the population, they're having considerably more than their fair share, so to speak, of abortions. To put these stats another way, about 121 out of every 1,000 black women between the ages of 20 and 24 have had an abortion, and about 90 out of every 1,000 black women between the ages of 25 and 29 have had an abortion. Religion and family status. About 43% of women who have had abortions identify as Protestant, and 27% identify as Catholic. So that's together 27% between the two major, or 70% between the two major Christian denominations in the country. About 75% of abortions are obtained by women who have never been married, and more than 60% of abortions are among women who already have at least one child. The reasons for abortion, this is where my stats deviate considerably from Dr. Hawkins. Again, according to the stats I've looked up, only about 1 to 2% of abortions in the U.S. are labeled as a result of rape or incest. She did cite it as unwanted sex. That could possibly broaden the category up considerably. Assuming that amount is correct, that ranges between about 12,000 and 24,000 abortions every year. About 6% of abortions are performed due to health risks to either the fetus or the mother. That's about 72,000 abortions every year. 75% of women choose to have an abortion. One of the reasons listed is because a child would interfere with their personal responsibilities, like Dr. Hawkins said, to other people usually, but also to themselves. 66% say they cannot afford a child or another child. 50% say either they don't want to be a single parent, or they're having difficulty with their partner right now and they don't want to endure the added stress that bringing a child into the mix would inevitably bring. Abortion and birth control. There's sometimes a concern that abortion is used as a form of birth control, and the stats seem to suggest that it's much more complicated than that. Only about 8% of women having an abortion have never used birth control before. 54% of women having abortions used birth control within the month they got pregnant. And 76% who used the pill said they used it inconsistently, and 49% of condom users say they use that inconsistently. So these figures obviously have implications that I'm not going to spell out for things like sex education and public sponsoring of birth control and lessons for how to use them. Only 13% of people who had an abortion said they used the pill correctly, and only 14% of people who had abortions say that they had used condoms correctly. And of course, this is their own self-reports. Just because they say it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Abortion and maternal death. Fewer than 1% of abortions involve major complications. Abortion is a remarkably safe medical procedure. Risk of maternal death due to complications increases with age. Abortions at 8 weeks, you only get about 1 death per million. Between 16 and 20, 1 per 29,000. After 21 weeks, it goes up to a fairly high rate of 1 per 11,000. So you can tell right there that if abortions are going to be had, it's very important for the health of the mother to have it early. The risk of death from complications due to childbirth is 11 times as high as the risk associated with abortion. So in short, giving birth is much riskier than abortion on average.